God honors those who honor him. 1 Samuel 2:30. You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio. The Blessed Woman. Learning about grace from the women of the Bible.
Chapter 3. The Gracious Art of Letting Go. Peeling our possessive fingers off our children and our dreams. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. 1 Samuel 1, verses 27 through 28. Empty. Blinking away the tears that threatened to spoil the moment, I looked again at the trailer hitched to the bumper of our car, awaiting the long trip back to Texas. Just 2 days before, our family had stuffed it full with a happy jumble of clothes, mismatched furniture, towels, linens, and who knows what else that my son Josh would need for his new life at college. Now it's mission fulfilled. The vacant trailer baked in the Florida sunshine, as empty as the proverbial nest Robert and I were going home to. A nest without Josh in it. Okay, to be honest, we didn't really qualify as empty nesters. Our son James and daughter Elaine still lived with us, and in 13 months, when he finished his studies, Josh would be coming back home too. What's more, with Gateway Church in its infancy, we were as busy as the parents of a newborn, so this didn't need to be a major trauma. But I couldn't help it. The thought of everyday life without all my children under one roof hovered over me like a thundercloud. We had always so enjoyed being together. Although I had relished every season of my kids' lives, these past few years with them almost grown, yet still at home, had been especially wonderful. We were having such fun. Now this whole college thing, which I grudgingly agreed was a good idea, had ruined my party. Determined not to dampen Josh's excitement, I choked back my tears. I tried not to think about the fact that at 18 years old, he was still my baby. He had never lived alone. Because the college didn't have dorms, he was moving into an apartment we had discovered online. When we arrived and I saw it for the first time, it was so unsavory that I'd cried out a silent but fervent prayer, "O Lord, protect my child." Forcing a smile, I hid my misgivings and wrapped my arms around Josh in a hug that would have to last for months. I could already feel the 1,000+ miles that separated Orlando from Southlake wedging their way between us. Elaine felt it too, so we made sure not to look at each other. Even a split second of eye contact would trigger an emotional meltdown of uniquely female proportions. So after waving our final goodbyes to Josh, we slid into the back seat together and stared wordlessly out our individual windows as the car rolled out of the parking lot. It's a wonder we didn't get cricks in our necks, because that's how we stayed mile after mile, our heads turned in opposite directions, watching from behind ocular waterfalls as Florida flew past. In the front seat, Robert and James bantered guy style, while behind us the vacant trailer rattled along like a child's empty wagon. In the hotel room that night, Robert congratulated me on my stellar self-control. "You did really great today, honey," he said. "You didn't even cry." "What?" I asked, checking his facial expression to see if he was joking. How could he have been oblivious to the tempest of tears that had raged 3 feet behind him for the past 6 hours? "Robert," I said, "I cried all the way to the state line." As it turned out, both he and James had indeed been oblivious. After leaving Josh with a casual, see you later, as if they were going to see him again after lunch, instead of a year, they had gotten on with the business of being men, doing what needs to be done, driving, talking about sports, and assuming the mysterious silence that had engulfed Elaine and me was a sure sign we had fallen asleep. I understood, though, although their emotions about Josh's absence hit them later, the guys didn't weep the way Elaine and I did, because they aren't women. God hasn't woven into their DNA our distinctively feminine drive to nurture and hold on to the lives God has entrusted to our care. A drive so strong that sometimes we find it hard to let go, even when we should. You do realize mothers have that tendency, don't you? We can be tempted to cling too long or too tightly, not just to our children, but also to our God-given dreams, destinies, and callings. In our determination to protect and direct them, we can stunt their growth. We can selfishly confine them within the limits of our own desires and expectations, like oversized philodendrons squeezed into undersized pots. We don't intend to do damage, of course. As grace-filled women, we want the lives we've brought forth to flourish and grow. We want to give them the freedom to be who and what God designed them to be. But it's not always easy to relax our maternal grip. Sometimes we need help peeling our possessive little fingers off the people and dreams that are dearest to us. We need another godly woman to show us how to trust the Lord and release our children into His capable hands. Do you know who's done that for me? Hannah, the mother of Samuel. Changing from the inside out. An inspiring example of a woman who learned the gracious art of letting go. Hannah's biblical story begins this way. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim, Zophim, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah. And he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was, year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. 1 Samuel 1, verses 1 through 7. Those verses reveal a fact about Hannah most of us can relate to. Her dream of having a child came wrapped in a very personal kind of pain. And barren for years, she suffered the cultural shame of childlessness. She endured relentless torment and heartache. Her soul yearned for a child, yet she was powerless to conceive. And so she adopted a perspective that's common in the early stages of divine dreaming, and saw her dream as a path to personal fulfillment, as a way to gain what she wanted and needed for herself. In other words, Hannah assumed what we all do in our spiritual adolescence, that our dreams are all about us. When she cried out to God to give her a baby, the void in her own life was her primary focus. And when her prayers remained unanswered, unable to think about anything except her own unfulfilled desire, she slipped into depression. She wept and cried, and on her worst days even refused to eat. Ever been there? Sure you have. Me too. With the possible exception of the part about refusing to eat, what is it about dreams deferred that makes us crave chocolate? And we all throw ourselves pity parties now and then. Most of the time, we don't even have as good a reason for it as Hannah did. Hers was truly a tragic situation. In her day, a woman's value depended almost exclusively on her ability to produce babies. Barrenness equaled worthlessness. Thus, Hannah's crying and dreaming continued until one day she couldn't take it any more. After one too many taunts from perpetually pregnant Peninnah and one too many double helping meals for which she had no appetite, she marched herself up to the house of the Lord, determined to convince him to do something about the situation. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord, and she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. 1 Samuel 1, verses 9 through 11. Do you see the shift she made there? As she prayed, Hannah's perspective changed. Rather than focusing only on what she could get from God, she began thinking about what she could give to God. She relaxed her selfish grip on her own desire and opened her heart to the plan he had in mind. In other words, she grew up a little. That's what always happens when we bring forth life God's way. We mature and develop. We begin to look beyond ourselves and what we want to see what God wants. It's a transformational process. As we conceive our children and help them grow, we grow too. And that growth changes everything. Hannah proved it. The moment she made her inward shift and took a step toward spiritual maturity, her story took a dramatic turn. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Verses 12 through 18. Notice that God didn't give Hannah her desire until Hannah gave her desire to God. Even though her dream of having a child was good, healthy, and divinely inspired, before it could be fulfilled, it had to be submitted and surrendered to the Lord. When Hannah made that surrender, she didn't just do it in the fleeting fervor of the moment. Her commitment to God was rock solid. She meant it. After her precious little boy Samuel was born, she kept him at home until he was about 3 years old. Then she took an emotional journey that made our family's trip from Texas to Florida pale by comparison. She packed up her toddler's suitcase, took his dimpled hands in hers, and made the 10-mile trek from their home in Ramah to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. When they arrived, she brought him to Eli and said, As surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I ask of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. Verses 25 through 28. With those words, Hannah turned, and after kissing her little boy on the cheek one more time, she went back home without him. Can you imagine how hard that must have been for her? Not just to say goodbye to Samuel, but also to entrust him to Eli's care? According to the Bible, he wasn't famous for being a great father. He had 2 sons of his own who were rebellious, corrupt, and totally profane. Serving as priests under Eli's supervision, they pilfered the people's sacrifices, and even slept with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. 1 Samuel 2:22. Yet Eli did nothing to restrain them. Although he scolded them a bit, they didn't heed his word at all. Hardly the best role model for Hannah's little boy, Eli had already demonstrated how disastrous his influence could be. What a situation! It would be tough enough to leave your 3-year-old in the hands of a good man. So you have to wonder how Hannah ever summoned the courage to leave her boy with a man like Eli. There is only one possible explanation. Her trust was not in man, but in God. She believed with all her heart God would be faithful to care and keep her son. Because of that confidence, after a short season of holding Samuel close, Hannah was able to release him to his divine destiny. What she didn't do, however, was abandon him. She kept on loving him as grace-filled women always do, influencing him in her own gentle way, even from afar. She sewed a little robe for him every year, then brought it with her when she and Elkanah traveled to Shiloh to worship. And each year after she draped her handiwork over her son's ever-broadening shoulders, Eli blessed Hannah's husband and said, "May the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord." Then they would go home, and the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. 1 Samuel 2, verses 20 and 21. Although Hannah may have missed having her firstborn under her roof, her nest was anything but empty. Filled with the rewards of her obedience, her home reverberated with the peals of children's laughter and the energetic thunder of growing feet. It overflowed with the answers to Hannah's prayers. 5 beautiful reminders that no matter how much we give, we can never outgive God. Well, that's all good for Hannah, you might say. But what about Samuel? How did he turn out? He turned out to be one of Israel's greatest priests and prophets. He became a greater blessing to more people than Hannah could have ever envisioned. He also moved back to his hometown of Ramah and lived there for the rest of his life. Think of it. He chose Ramah, not Shiloh. Apparently, even though Hannah's opportunity to mother Samuel full-time was brief, her influence made a lasting impression. Her short season of nurturing, done God's way in God's time, impacted her little boy more than Eli ever could. Nose-blowing, potty-going, and the stages of life. Oh, how grateful I have been over the years for Hannah's example. It's encouraged me in so many ways. As a young mother, after I realized I couldn't personally protect my children 24/7, Hannah's story helped assure me God was big enough to take care of them all the time. I could trust Him to watch over them when I couldn't, sending them off to school each day after Robert and I had prayed for them and asked God to guard them from evil. I could release them to Him with complete peace of mind. That's not to say I expected Him to protect them from all negative experiences. God never promised to do that. None of us get to float through our days in a divine biosphere, insulated from the hazards of planet Earth. So my children experienced the normal bumps and bruises that go along with growing up. It's a good thing they did, too. The rough spots kids encounter and the minor childhood pains they feel help them learn to go to God for themselves when they need help. If they never faced any difficulties, they wouldn't develop the strength to overcome them. They wouldn't grow into the conquerors they were meant to be. That's why, as parents, we need to seek God for the right balance as we guide our children to maturity. We have to avoid the tendency to be overprotective while still being there to intervene for our kids when they truly need our help. It's a challenge for sure, but over the years, that's what I tried to do. I trusted the Lord, gave our kids the freedom to grow up, and let them know that if they needed an advocate, they could count on me to be there. When Josh was punished in elementary school for the misbehavior of his entire class just because the teacher thought a pastor's kid should be held to a higher standard, I got righteously indignant. I didn't object to his being punished along with his classmates for doing something wrong, but I wasn't about to sit quietly by while he was made the scapegoat. I wanted my kids to do what was right because it was right, not because their father was a pastor. So I did what needed to be done about it. Stepping into the role of the protective, warring mother, I went to set the teacher straight. Would I do the same thing for Josh now? Of course not. There comes a time when intervening in such ways is inappropriate. You have to discern the season for nurturing your children. In the beginning, when they were little, you're 100% involved. You're everything to them. You wipe their nose, you take them to the potty, but as they grow up, you start letting them take care of those things. When it comes to nose blowing and potty going, you let them handle it. You don't even ask them to report to you about it. Assuming no news is good news, you just take it for granted that all is working well. Maybe that sounds silly, but it's true nonetheless. Every life we bring forth goes through different stages. So we have to learn when to protect and give it our all, and when to release it and give it the freedom to grow according to God's plan. Whether that life is a child, a ministry, a project, a business, or some other God-given dream, we must realize there comes a time when we can no longer project our own wishes on it. We must let it take on its own personality and follow its own God-ordained course. I've been through that process with our women's ministry. When I first stepped back into it at Gateway, I was totally consumed by it. My assistant and I exchanged emails at the strangest hours of the night because, at that point, the ministry was like a baby. It needed 100% of my attention. It demanded constant care and feeding. Today, things have changed. I don't send emails at midnight anymore. The ministry has grown. It's on a solid path. The intensity of my involvement has decreased because I have a wonderful team of gifted, anointed women helping me. To poke my nose into everything that's going on and try to control it all would be unhealthy. We're in a different season now. The stages and seasons of growth are something my husband understands well. He knows how to initiate an aspect of ministry and then release it when the time is right to someone who's qualified to take it to the next level. He sets that person free to run with the vision, but he does it without abandoning her. He provides support and accountability without being a micromanager. It's one of the key elements of Gateway's success. We couldn't possibly have grown so quickly if Robert felt compelled to know and control everything that's going on. The different elements of the church, things such as freedom, stewardship, and worship ministries, couldn't have expanded and matured as they have if he held on to them with a tight fist. What enables him to delegate such vital responsibilities to others with such complete peace of mind? He has something in common with Hannah. He doesn't really depend on people to make sure everything turns out all right. Ultimately, his dependence is on God. He has an exorbitant trust in God. As a leader myself, I try to follow his example. I endeavor to create an environment of trust and support so those who work for me can develop and grow. I share my values, perspective, and vision, but as soon as my team members are ready, I let them stretch their wings. When Robert and I travel, I tell them, I will be gone for a while. You can reach me if you really need me, but don't feel like you have to consult me on every decision. Just pray and follow the leading of the Lord yourself. When I get back, I'll support whatever decision you've made. If I have any further thoughts about it, I'll let you know. My goal is to create the same atmosphere of love and trust that as a mother I tried to provide for my children. I never wanted them to be afraid they'd make a mistake. I wanted them to be secure in the knowledge that if they did their best, I would back them up. If they got something wrong, instead of criticizing or belittling them, I'd encourage and coach them so that they could do better the next time. At home, at church, in the office, and everywhere else, I have found this principle remains true. If we nurture with an open hand and put our confidence in God, the precious lives under our influence will have plenty of room to grow. Do that. Don't do this. As much as I've learned from Hannah, she's not the only mentor who's taught me the power of a mother's influence and the importance of graciously letting go. There's another woman in the Bible who's instructed me too. Her name is Athaliah, and she's helped me in the way the do and don't photos in fashion magazines help people who want to sharpen their sense of style. You've seen those pictures, right? Definitely worth 1,000 words. They show rather than tell what's right and what's wrong. Do wear this, don't wear that. Do wear the stilettos with the evening dress, don't wear the flip-flops. Or do flip-flops go with anything these days? I can't remember. Do wear the denim, don't wear the spandex. Although most fashion editors are probably unaware of it, it's a method of teaching that originated with the Bible. Seriously, the scriptures are full of snapshots of people who did things God's way and people who didn't, those who got it right and those who got it wrong. The Bible snapshots are captured in story form, of course. They aren't literal photos, but if they were, Hannah's would definitely be topped by the word do. Athaliah's, on the other hand, would be emblazoned with a big, bold don't. Hannah's polar opposite, Athaliah, stands apart as one of the most wicked women mentioned in the Bible, born of the notoriously evil lineage of Israel's king Ahab. Her rise to prominence began when her son Ahaziah became king of Judah. His tragic reign lasted only a year and ended in his death because he walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother advised him to do wickedly. Therefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of his father to his destruction. 2 Chronicles 22, verses 3 through 4. I think those are some of the saddest verses in the Bible. It's heartbreaking to think that a mother, driven by her own twisted past, would influence her son in such terrible ways that her counsel would end up killing him. Yet Athaliah did it. And if that wasn't bad enough, once her son was dead and could no longer serve her selfish ambitions, she arose and destroyed all of the royal heirs of the house of Judah. 2 Chronicles 22, verse 10. Then she reigned as an ungodly queen until she was overthrown and executed 6 years later. I know what you must be thinking. You're wondering what on earth any Christian woman would have in common with Athaliah. You'd be surprised. When it comes to family ties, we all start out in the same situation she did. Before we commit our lives to Christ, Satan himself is our spiritual father. Talk about an evil lineage. We have the worst there is. Granted, now that we're saved, we're part of a new spiritual family. God is our Father, and Satan no longer has authority over us. But that doesn't mean he's stopped trying to influence us. He hasn't. He still does everything he can to tempt and deceive us into thinking and acting like we're his children. Using negative influences from our past, he pushes us to perpetuate his evil actions and patterns of thought not only in our own lives, but also in the lives of our kids, our employees, and others we impact every day. My parents were some of the best in the world, so I figure if this is true of me, it's true of everyone. We all come into parenting with a negative past. We all pick up undesirable traits and tendencies from family members, teachers, and others as we're growing up. If we're not mindful of those tendencies, we'll inadvertently make the mistake Athaliah did. We'll pass them on to our children. We'll inject the harmful effects of our past into the lives we're bringing forth in the present. Unlike Athaliah, however, we won't do it in blatant ways. We're hardly going to build idolatrous altars in the living room. We'll do it more subtly, through our negative words, attitudes, and habits. Have you ever noticed that our kids always pick up on what we wish they wouldn't? It seems they absorb the negative things so much easier than the positive. That's something I had to be especially aware of with my daughter Elaine. Just a few months before she was born, Robert and I were watching an old episode of I Love Lucy. As we laughed at Lucy's antics, a thought suddenly struck me. What would it be like to raise such a strong-willed, red-headed girl? When Elaine arrived, I found out. She challenged me from the time she was an infant. I'd dress her in a cute little outfit, and she'd throw a fit until I took it off. I didn't realize what a dangerous precedent I was setting. The mother-daughter clothing battles had begun, and at 6 months old, she was already winning. Elaine's feisty, fearless personality was the total opposite of mine. Without a shy bone in her body, she was more like her father in every way. Not the new, improved, post-salvation version of her father either, but the unsaved, ornery one. Her two easygoing, obedient brothers rarely got in trouble at school, but Elaine made up for that. In her first week of kindergarten, she not only fought the class bullies, a set of twin boys, she also defeated them. Her prize was a trip to the principal's office. The same week, she informed her teacher she would be taking over the class, confident she was competent to do so. After all, she had been lining up her dolls and teaching them for years. Elaine took great offense when her offer was refused. I may not have known much about raising a strong-willed, red-headed girl back then, but one thing was crystal clear. I could not make Elaine be like me. If I wanted her to be who she was meant to be, the person God created her to be, I couldn't project myself onto her. I couldn't pass along to her my own fears and insecurities. I couldn't tell her to be quiet and stay in the background like I tend to do. She's a natural leader, a born communicator. The old-fashioned religious ideas I grew up with, for example, women shouldn't speak in church, would have utterly frustrated her. So I knew what I had to do. I had to deal with the wounds in my own soul so I wouldn't end up inflicting them on her. Hurting people hurt people. Healed people heal people. The healthier we are in our soul, the purer our influence will be. So I had to get healthy. I had to deal with the pain from my past to make sure it wouldn't leave the scars on my daughter it had left on me. No doubt, you feel the same way. You don't want to poison your God-given dreams with the leftovers of your own brokenness. You don't want to pass on yesterday's limitations to the lives you're bringing forth today. To your sons and daughters, the women you mentor, the employees who look to you for guidance. You want to position them to mature unhindered, giving them godly counsel and empowering them to succeed in every season of life. You want to help them grow. So take a tip from Athaliah, look around and check the fruit you're producing in the lives you're nurturing. Take the time to deal with the pain from your past, and every once in a while, just for good measure, glance again at the biblical photo of the mentor you don't want to be. On the other hand, let's pin up a depiction of Hannah in our hearts. May it serve as a reminder to pray for, protect, and release our children and dreams to God.
You are listening to Second Chance Ministry Radio.